The autumn of 1844 brought unseasonable warmth to Richmond's Churchill district, where the grand houses of Virginia's tobacco aristocracy lined cobblestone streets with the precision of a military formation. Among these estates, the Rowland Mansion stood as a testament to 3 generations of careful wealth accumulation, its federal-style facade concealing rooms filled with mahogany furniture and the quiet desperation that money could not cure. Catherine Rowland, 23 years of age, had inherited not only her father's substantial fortune, but also his collection of 47 enslaved individuals who worked the tobacco plantations stretching along the James River. Local society records from St. John's Episcopal Church describe her as a woman of uncommon beauty and education, though parish visitors often noted an intensity in her manner that made lengthy conversations uncomfortable. Her closest companion was Lydia Pierce, daughter of a prominent banking family, whose own inheritance included considerable real estate holdings throughout the Shockoe Bottom district. The friendship between the two women had endured since their shared education at Mrs. Pemberton's Academy for Young Ladies, where they had distinguished themselves equally in French literature and watercolor painting. Church records indicate they were rarely seen apart during social functions, their carriages often observed traveling in tandem along Main Street toward the fashionable shops near Capitol Square. What made their relationship particularly noteworthy to Richmond society was an arrangement that would, by winter's end, become the subject of whispered speculation in every parlor from Church Hill to the Fan District. If you're enjoying the story and feel like helping the channel with any amount, please support us by clicking the thanks button and donating whatever you wish. This really helps the channel keep posting new stories. Among Catherine's inherited property was a young man named Samuel, approximately 25 years of age, whose remarkable education and refined bearing had made him an object of considerable attention within the peculiar social dynamics of the Rowland household. Previous plantation records suggest he had been taught to read and write by Catherine's late father, an unusual practice that had raised eyebrows among neighboring families. Samuel's responsibilities included managing correspondence, maintaining household accounts, and serving as Catherine's personal attendant during social engagements. The arrangement that would prove so fateful began innocuously enough. Lydia Pierce had often admired Samuel's intelligence and deportment during her frequent visits to the Rowland estate. Catherine, perhaps influenced by the deep affection she held for her friend, proposed that Samuel divide his time between both households. This sharing arrangement, while not unprecedented among wealthy families who lent skilled servants for special occasions, became a permanent fixture that lasted through the spring and summer months of 1844. Contemporary accounts from household staff suggest the arrangement functioned smoothly during its initial months. Samuel would spend alternating weeks at each estate, maintaining his duties with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized his service to Catherine's family. Visitors to both households noted his respectful manner and evident intelligence, though some observed that he seemed to carry himself with unusual dignity for someone in his position. The first signs of tension emerged during the late summer social season. Mrs. Martha Wickham, a frequent guest at both the Rowland and Pierce households, later testified to local authorities that she had observed increasingly pointed exchanges between the two friends regarding Samuel's services. What had begun as friendly discussions about his capabilities gradually transformed into subtle competitions for his attention and time. By September, according to correspondence found among Lydia Pierce's personal effects, the sharing arrangement had begun to strain the friendship that had sustained both women since childhood. Letters between the two reveal a gradual shift from affectionate exchanges about social engagements to terse communications regarding Samuel's schedule and duties. One particular letter, dated September 18th, shows Lydia requesting that Samuel remain at her household for an additional week to assist with preparations for her autumn dinner party. Catherine's response, discovered among papers in the Rowland family Bible, suggests growing irritation with these extended absences. The letter, written in her characteristic precise script, expresses concern about household management difficulties and requests adherence to their original agreement. The tone, while maintaining social courtesy, carries an underlying firmness that friends of both women would later describe as uncharacteristic of Catherine's usual accommodating nature. The social dynamics of Richmond's elite circles during this period provided fertile ground for the tensions developing between the two friends. The tobacco aristocracy maintained complex relationships built on displays of wealth and generosity, where the lending of valuable property served as both a demonstration of friendship and a subtle assertion of superiority. Within this context, the sharing of someone as capable and refined as Samuel became a symbol of the relationship's balance of power. Household staff from both estates reported increasing awkwardness during the transition periods, when Samuel would move between the two households. Sarah Jenkins, a cook in the Pierce household, later told investigators that Samuel appeared increasingly withdrawn during his stays, often spending long hours reading in the servants' quarters rather than socializing with other members of the staff. Her counterpart at the Rowland estate, an elderly woman named Martha, observed similar changes in his demeanor. The autumn dinner party at the Pierce mansion on October 10th marked a significant turning point in the developing crisis. According to guest accounts recorded in various diaries and letters from the period, the evening began with the usual displays of Richmond society's refinement. The menu featured delicacies imported from Philadelphia and New York, while the parlor entertainment included performances on the pianoforte and readings from contemporary poetry. Samuel's presence at this gathering, serving as Lydia's personal attendant, did not go unnoticed by the assembled guests. Mrs. Elizabeth Randolph, wife of a prominent tobacco merchant, noted in her diary that evening that Catherine appeared unusually subdued throughout the dinner conversation. Multiple witnesses observed pointed exchanges between the two friends regarding Samuel's exceptional service and intelligence, conversations that carried undertones of tension despite their polite surface. The evening's conclusion brought an incident that several guests would later describe as the first open display of the conflict developing between Catherine and Lydia. As Samuel assisted with clearing the dinner service, Catherine made what appeared to be a casual suggestion that he should return to the Rowland estate the following morning, rather than completing his scheduled week at the Pierce household. Lydia's response, according to witness accounts, was firm in its insistence that the original arrangement be honored. The exchange, while conducted with the restraint expected of their social position, created an uncomfortable silence among the remaining guests. Dr. William Thornton, the Pierce family physician who had attended the dinner, later described the moment as feeling charged with an emotion that seemed disproportionate to the apparent subject of discussion. The evening ended with Catherine's early departure and what guests described as an unusually cold farewell between the two friends. Winter's arrival brought increasing isolation for both women as the sharing arrangement continued, despite the growing strain it placed on their friendship. Samuel's own perspective during this period remains largely undocumented, though household records suggest he continued performing his duties with the same quiet competence that had always characterized his service. Several staff members noted that he appeared to spend increasing time in solitary activities, particularly reading religious texts that he kept in his personal quarters. The correspondence between Catherine and Lydia became less frequent during the winter months, though the letters that survive from this period reveal a relationship under considerable stress. Lydia's communications show increasing defensiveness about her right to Samuel's services, according to their agreement, while Catherine's responses display growing impatience with what she perceived as excessive demands on her property. The affectionate tone that had characterized their earlier correspondence gradually disappeared, replaced by formal politeness that friends of both women found deeply concerning. Local society began to take notice of the changed dynamic between the two friends. Mrs. Wickham later testified that invitations to social gatherings began specifying which of the two women would attend, as hosts had learned that their presence together created an atmosphere of tension that made other guests uncomfortable. The sharing arrangement that had initially seemed like an innovative solution to Lydia's need for skilled household assistance had become a source of social disruption throughout Richmond's elite circles. By February of 1845, according to records maintained by Dr. Thornton, both women had begun experiencing what he described as nervous exhaustion. Catherine's symptoms included difficulty sleeping and what her housekeeper described as an increasing tendency towards sudden outbursts of anger over trivial household matters. Lydia displayed similar signs of emotional distress, including frequent headaches and what her staff characterized as an unusual preoccupation with Samuel's activities during his absences from her household. The final crisis began on March 7, 1845, when Samuel failed to arrive at the Pierce estate for his scheduled week of service. According to household staff at the Rowland mansion, Catherine had simply announced the previous evening that the sharing arrangement would no longer continue. No explanation was provided to Lydia, who learned of this decision only when Samuel failed to appear at her door on the appointed morning. Lydia's immediate response, as documented in a letter she sent to Catherine that same day, was one of outraged disbelief. The letter, discovered among Catherine's papers following subsequent events, demanded an explanation for what Lydia characterized as a breach of their agreement and an insult to their long-standing friendship. The language, while maintaining the forms of polite society, carried an intensity that friends of both women found alarming. Catherine's reply, written later that same day, represented a complete abandonment of the diplomatic tone that had previously characterized even their most strained exchanges. The letter, brief and coldly worded, simply stated that the arrangement had become inconvenient and would not resume. There was no acknowledgement of Lydia's emotional investment in the relationship or recognition of the social embarrassment caused by the abrupt termination of their agreement. The immediate aftermath of this rupture sent shockwaves through Richmond's social circles. Within days, news of the broken friendship had reached every major household in the Church Hill and Court End districts. The nature of their conflict, involving as it did the disposition of enslaved property, touched on the complex social dynamics that governed relationships among Virginia's planter aristocracy. Friends of both women found themselves forced to choose sides in what had become an irreconcilable dispute. Samuel's own position during this crisis remains largely undocumented, though household staff from the Rowland estate noted that he appeared increasingly withdrawn following the termination of the sharing arrangement. Martha, the elderly cook who had known him since his arrival at the estate as a child, later told investigators that he spent long hours in solitary prayer during this period. His reading materials, she observed, had shifted from the classical literature he had previously favored to religious texts focused on themes of suffering and redemption. The weeks following the rupture saw both women retreat into increasing isolation within their respective households. Catherine's social calendar, previously filled with the obligations of Richmond's winter season, became notably sparse. Visitors to the Rowland estate during this period described an atmosphere of oppressive quiet, broken only by the sounds of household routine carried out with mechanical precision. The elaborate dinner parties that had been a hallmark of Catherine's social presence ceased entirely. Lydia's response to the crisis manifested differently but with equal intensity. Rather than withdrawing from social obligations, she appeared to increase her visibility within Richmond society, hosting gatherings with unprecedented frequency. Guests at these events later described them as strangely frantic affairs, characterized by excessive hospitality and a manic attention to detail that made attendees uncomfortable. The conversations at these gatherings invariably turned to discussions of loyalty and betrayal, though Lydia never mentioned Catherine by name. Dr. Thornton's medical records from this period document increasing concerns about both women's mental state. Catherine's symptoms had progressed from simple sleeplessness to what he characterized as episodes of profound melancholy, alternating with periods of restless agitation. Her household staff reported finding her walking the halls of the mansion at all hours, often stopping to stare from windows overlooking the gardens where she and Lydia had once taken their afternoon walks together. Lydia's condition presented differently, but with equally concerning symptoms. The physician noted increasing signs of what contemporary medical understanding would have characterized as nervous excitability. Her correspondence from this period shows a marked deterioration in her usually precise handwriting, while her household staff reported dramatic mood swings that left the entire Pierce estate walking on proverbial eggshells. The final confrontation occurred on April 15, 1845, during what Richmond society had anticipated would be a routine spring gathering at the home of Colonel James Madison, a mutual acquaintance of both families. The colonel had apparently hoped that bringing the two women together in a neutral social setting might provide an opportunity for reconciliation. Instead, the evening became the stage for a public display of animosity that shocked even those who had witnessed the gradual deterioration of their friendship. According to multiple witness accounts recorded in letters and diary entries from the period, the confrontation began when Lydia arrived at the gathering to discover Catherine already present in the drawing room. The initial tension was palpable but controlled, with both women maintaining the facade of polite indifference that their social position demanded. The guests noted the careful way attendees positioned themselves to avoid creating situations where the two women might be forced into direct conversation. The evening's entertainment included the customary musical performances and readings, during which both women maintained their composure despite the obvious strain of their proximity. However, as the gathering moved toward its conclusion and guests began preparing for departure, a seemingly innocent comment about household management triggered the explosion that had been building for months. Mrs. Randolph, who witnessed the exchange, later described it as beginning with Lydia's casual observation that finding reliable household staff had become increasingly difficult in Richmond. Catherine's response, according to multiple accounts, was swift and cutting. She suggested that perhaps the difficulty lay not in finding reliable staff, but in understanding how to maintain proper relationships with one's social equals. The exchange rapidly escalated beyond the bounds of acceptable social discourse. Lydia's reply, witnessed by nearly a dozen members of Richmond's most prominent families, abandoned all pretense of diplomatic language. She accused Catherine of behavior that was both selfish and cruel, using language that guests later described as shocking in its intensity and personal nature. Catherine's response represented a complete breakdown of the social restraints that had previously governed her public behavior. According to witness accounts, she accused Lydia of developing an inappropriate attachment that had made the sharing arrangement impossible to continue. The specific nature of her accusations, while not explicitly recorded in contemporary accounts, was apparently clear enough to cause several ladies present to withdraw from the room in embarrassment. The confrontation ended only when Colonel Madison intervened, though not before both women had said things that made any future reconciliation impossible. The remaining guests departed quickly, leaving behind an atmosphere of scandal that would dominate Richmond society conversation for months to come. The specific details of what had been said remained the subject of speculation and whispered discussion throughout the spring and summer social seasons. Samuel's position during this period became increasingly precarious as the full implications of the conflict became apparent. Household staff noted that he appeared to understand that his presence had become the catalyst for a breakdown that extended far beyond simple disputes over property. His behavior during these weeks was characterized by extreme withdrawal and what Martha described as an almost constant state of prayer and meditation. The resolution of the immediate crisis came in a form that satisfied neither woman but effectively ended their public conflict. Catherine announced her intention to sell Samuel to a tobacco planter in the Tidewater region, effectively removing him from Richmond society entirely. The announcement, made through intermediaries rather than direct communication, reached Lydia just 2 days before the planned transaction was to take place. Lydia's response to this news marked the final act of their destroyed friendship. Rather than accepting the inevitable, she made a desperate attempt to purchase Samuel herself, offering a sum significantly above his market value. The offer, conveyed through her attorney to Catherine's legal representatives, included a personal letter that represented her final attempt at reconciliation. Catherine's rejection of the offer was absolute and final. The sale proceeded as planned, with Samuel departing Richmond on April 30th aboard a riverboat bound for Norfolk. Household staff from both estates later reported that neither woman appeared in public during the days surrounding his departure. The sharing arrangement that had begun as a symbol of their deep friendship had ended with the permanent separation of all parties involved. The aftermath of these events cast a shadow over Richmond society that persisted well into the following year. Both families found their social standing affected by the public nature of the conflict and the whispered speculation about its underlying causes. Catherine retreated into an increasingly reclusive lifestyle, maintaining only the most essential social obligations, while avoiding any gatherings where she might encounter mutual friends of herself and Lydia. The Rowland estate itself seemed to reflect its mistress's changed circumstances. Visitors during this period described an atmosphere of profound quiet, broken only by the sounds of essential household activities. The elaborate gardens that had once been Catherine's pride began showing signs of neglect, while the house itself took on what guests characterized as an air of abandonment, despite being fully staffed and maintained. Lydia's response to the final separation was markedly different, but equally destructive to her social position. Rather than retreating from society, she appeared to throw herself into social activities with desperate intensity. The dinner parties and gatherings she hosted during the summer of 1845 were characterized by an almost manic attention to detail and entertainment that made guests uncomfortable. The forced gaiety of these events became a subject of sympathetic but concerned discussion among Richmond's social elite. Dr. Thornton's records from this period document the continued deterioration of both women's physical and mental health. Catherine's symptoms had progressed to what he characterized as a form of nervous exhaustion that left her unable to maintain normal social interactions. Her correspondence ceased almost entirely, while household staff reported that she spent entire days in her private chambers without receiving any visitors or engaging in any activities beyond the most basic necessities. Lydia's condition manifested as a different but equally concerning set of symptoms. The physician noted increasing signs of what contemporary medical understanding would have identified as nervous agitation, accompanied by periods of profound depression. Her behavior alternated between frenzied social activity and complete withdrawal, creating a pattern that alarmed both her household staff and the few friends who maintained contact with her. The broader implications of their conflict extended beyond the personal tragedy of their destroyed friendship. The incident had exposed the complex emotional dynamics that could develop within the seemingly straightforward economic relationships that defined slavery in Virginia society. The sharing arrangement that had seemed so practical and beneficial had revealed deeper currents of possession, jealousy, and control that challenged the social framework within which such relationships were supposed to function. Contemporary accounts from other plantation families suggest that the Roland Pierce incident became a cautionary tale that influenced similar arrangements throughout the Richmond area. Several families who had previously engaged in sharing skilled slaves discontinued such practices, citing concerns about the potential for conflict and social disruption. The incident had demonstrated that even the closest friendships could not withstand the pressures created by competing claims on human property. The final documented interaction between Catherine and Lydia occurred during the winter of 1845, more than 8 months after Samuel's departure from Richmond. The encounter took place at St. John's Episcopal Church during Christmas morning services, where both women found themselves seated in adjacent pews due to the crowded conditions created by the holiday congregation. Witnesses present described a moment of profound tension when the two women became aware of each other's proximity. Neither acknowledged the other's presence, but the careful way both women avoided any action that might bring them into direct contact created an atmosphere that several parishioners later described as deeply uncomfortable. The service proceeded without incident, but both women departed immediately afterward without participating in the customary social exchanges that followed Christmas worship. This encounter represented the last time the two women were known to have been in the same location. Both continued to live in Richmond, maintaining their respective households and fulfilling basic social obligations, but their circles of activity were carefully arranged to prevent any further meetings. Friends of both families reported that social invitations began requiring advance confirmation of which woman would attend, as hosts learned that their simultaneous presence created situations too uncomfortable for normal social interaction. The ultimate resolution of their individual stories unfolded over the following years in ways that reflected the permanent damage caused by their conflict. Catherine's retreat from society became increasingly complete as time passed. By 1847, according to church records, she had ceased attending regular Sunday services and rarely left the Roland estate except for essential business matters. Her household staff reported that she spent most of her time reading religious texts and maintaining elaborate correspondence with missionaries working in foreign fields. The gardens at the Roland estate, once famous throughout Richmond for their beauty and careful maintenance, gradually returned to a more natural state as Catherine lost interest in their upkeep. Visitors during this period described an atmosphere of genteel decay that seemed to reflect the mistress's own withdrawal from the world. The house itself remained properly maintained, but the social life that had once filled its rooms ceased entirely. Lydia's path through the aftermath of their conflict followed a different but equally destructive trajectory. Her attempts to maintain an active social presence gradually became unsustainable as her behavior became increasingly erratic. Friends who had initially attributed her intense social activities to natural high spirits began to recognize signs of deeper emotional disturbance that made normal social interaction impossible. By 1846, according to Dr. Thornton's records, Lydia's condition had deteriorated to the point where her family began considering more drastic interventions. The frantic social activities that had characterized the immediate aftermath of her conflict with Catherine gave way to periods of deep depression, alternating with episodes of nervous agitation. Her household staff reported finding her wandering the Pierce mansion at all hours, often searching through rooms as if looking for something that could never be found. The broader Richmond society gradually adapted to the permanent absence of both women from their normal social roles. The vacuum left by their withdrawal was filled by other families who assumed the hosting duties and social obligations that Catherine and Lydia had previously shared between them. The incident itself became a subject of whispered reference rather than open discussion, though its impact on local social dynamics remained evident for years to come. Samuel's fate following his departure from Richmond remained unknown to local society until 1848, when a letter arrived at the Rowland estate from his new owner in the Norfolk area. The correspondence, apparently prompted by questions about Samuel's background and education, revealed that he had maintained his literacy and religious devotion despite the difficult circumstances of his relocation. The letter mentioned his exceptional character and intelligence, though it provided no details about his personal circumstances or emotional state. Catherine's response to this letter, according to her housekeeper Martha, was one of profound distress. The reminder of the young man whose presence had catalyzed the destruction of her most important friendship appeared to trigger a complete emotional collapse that lasted several days. Dr. Thornton was summoned to attend her, though his records from this period suggest that her condition was beyond the reach of contemporary medical intervention. The final act of the tragedy unfolded during the spring of 1849, nearly 4 years after Samuel's departure from Richmond. Lydia Pierce was discovered in the drawing room of her family's mansion, having apparently taken her own life during the night. The method, while not explicitly recorded in official documents, appeared to involve substances that Dr. Thornton had previously prescribed for her nervous condition, but in quantities far exceeding therapeutic doses. The discovery was made by household staff who had become concerned when Lydia failed to appear for breakfast at her customary time. The scene they encountered was arranged with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her social gatherings during the years following her conflict with Catherine. She had apparently spent considerable time preparing for her final act, leaving behind detailed instructions for the disposition of her property and personal effects. Among Lydia's personal papers, discovered during the settlement of her estate, was a collection of letters that she had written but never sent to Catherine during the years following their final confrontation. These documents, according to the attorney who reviewed them, contained repeated expressions of regret about their destroyed friendship and speculation about alternative ways their conflict might have been resolved. The letters revealed the depth of emotional devastation that Lydia had concealed behind her public facade. Catherine's response to news of Lydia's death marked her final withdrawal from any connection to Richmond society. According to church records, she attended the funeral service, but departed immediately afterward without speaking to any other mourners or participating in the customary expressions of condolence to the Pierce family. Witnesses described her appearance as that of someone who had aged decades in the span of a few years, her face bearing the marks of prolonged suffering and isolation. The settlement of Lydia's estate revealed one final gesture toward their destroyed friendship. Among her specific bequests was a provision leaving her collection of French literature, which she and Catherine had once enjoyed reading together, to Catherine Rowland. The books arrived at the Rowland estate, accompanied by a brief note expressing hope that they might provide some comfort during Catherine's own period of grief and reflection. Catherine's response to this final communication was characteristic of the complete emotional withdrawal that had marked her life since their conflict. The books were reportedly placed, unopened, in a locked room at the Rowland estate, where they remained untouched for the rest of Catherine's life. Household staff later reported that she never spoke Lydia's name again after the funeral, nor did she ever acknowledge receipt of the bequest. The years following Lydia's death saw Catherine's gradual transformation into a figure of local legend rather than social reality. Her appearances in public became so rare that her presence at church services or business meetings became subjects of community discussion. The Rowland estate took on an atmosphere of Gothic isolation, maintained by a loyal staff, but increasingly cut off from normal social interaction. Local records suggest that Catherine devoted her remaining years to correspondence with religious organizations and charitable activities that required no direct social contact. Her donations to missionary societies and orphanages became legendary throughout Virginia, though she never participated in the social aspects of charitable work that typically accompanied such philanthropy. The woman who had once been one of Richmond's most celebrated hostesses had become a hermit, sustained only by the memories of friendships that could never be repaired. The final chapter of Catherine's story unfolded during the winter of 1852, when she was discovered in her private chambers, having died peacefully in her sleep. The discovery was made by Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Rowland family for more than 30 years and had witnessed the entire arc of the tragedy that had consumed her mistress's life. According to Martha's later account, Catherine's final years had been marked by increasing fragility and what appeared to be a gradual withdrawal from life itself. The settlement of Catherine's estate revealed the extent to which her guilt and grief had influenced her final years. Her will included substantial provisions for the families of enslaved individuals who had been sold during her lifetime, including a specific bequest intended to locate and provide for Samuel's welfare if he could be found. The document also contained detailed instructions for the maintenance of both the Rowland family cemetery and a separate memorial garden dedicated to the memory of friendships lost to misunderstanding and pride. Among Catherine's personal effects, discovered in the locked room where she had placed Lydia's final gift, was a collection of letters and diary entries that provided the most complete record of the emotional devastation caused by their conflict. These documents, sealed by her attorney according to her specific instructions, revealed the depth of her regret about the choices that had destroyed the most important relationship in her life. The writings showed a woman tormented by the knowledge that pride and possessiveness had cost her not only her dearest friend, but ultimately her connection to life itself. The parallel graves of Catherine Rowland and Lydia Pierce in Richmond's Shockoe Hill Cemetery stand today as silent testimony to a friendship destroyed by forces that neither woman fully understood or could control. Their headstones, separated by less than 50 feet, but representing an emotional distance that proved impossible to bridge, bear inscriptions that speak of faith and devotion but make no reference to their shared history or tragic estrangement. The broader implications of their story continued to resonate through Richmond society long after both women had passed from living memory. The incident had exposed the dangerous emotional undercurrents that could develop within relationships involving human property, challenging assumptions about the nature of friendship and loyalty within the context of slavery. Local families who had witnessed the destruction of such a close relationship became more cautious about arrangements that might create similar conflicts. Samuel's ultimate fate remained unknown to Richmond society, though records suggest that he lived to see the end of slavery in Virginia. A document discovered among Civil War-era papers at a Norfolk plantation includes a reference to a man of his description who had taught reading to other enslaved individuals despite the legal prohibitions against such education. Whether this was the same Samuel who had been the unwitting catalyst for such tragedy remains a matter of speculation, though the description matches contemporary accounts of his character and capabilities. The house that had once hosted Catherine's elaborate social gatherings was sold following the settlement of her estate and converted to other purposes as Richmond's social geography changed during the antebellum period. The Pierce mansion suffered a similar fate. its elegant rooms eventually serving commercial functions that bore no resemblance to the refined social life that had once filled them with music and conversation. The sharing arrangement that had begun as a gesture of friendship and convenience had revealed the impossible contradictions inherent in treating human beings as property to be lent and borrowed. The emotional investments that both women had developed in their relationship with Samuel had exposed the fundamental instability of a social system that required constant negotiation between economic interests and human feelings. Local historians who have studied the incident note its significance as an example of the personal costs exacted by slavery on all participants, including those who appeared to benefit from the system. The destruction of Catherine and Lydia's friendship demonstrated that even the closest relationships could not withstand the moral contradictions and emotional pressures created by human bondage. The letters and documents that survived both women provide insight into a world where personal relationships were constantly complicated by questions of property, possession, and control. Their correspondence reveals the gradual transformation of genuine affection into suspicion and rivalry, as competing claims on Samuel's time and loyalty created tensions that neither friendship nor social convention could resolve. The tragedy of their story lies not only in the loss of their friendship, but in the broader pattern of human destruction caused by a system that reduced people to property. Samuel's own voice remains largely absent from the historical record, though his presence as an educated and dignified individual clearly challenged both women's understanding of their role as owners and his position as property. The Richmond society that witnessed their conflict was itself transformed by the experience. The incident had demonstrated the instability of relationships built on the foundation of human bondage and had revealed emotional dynamics that challenged prevailing assumptions about the nature of slavery and social control. The whispered discussions that followed their public confrontation reflected a broader unease about contradictions that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Dr. Thornton's medical records from this period provide insight into the psychological costs of slavery for those who participated in it as owners. His observations about both women's deteriorating mental health suggest that their conflict had exposed deeper anxieties about the moral implications of their social position. The nervous conditions that affected both Catherine and Lydia appeared to reflect guilt and confusion that contemporary medicine was unable to address or even fully understand. The religious elements that appeared in both women's responses to their crisis reflect the broader spiritual tensions created by slavery in Virginia society. Catherine's increasing devotion to missionary work and Lydia's search for redemption through charitable activities suggest their recognition that their conflict had revealed fundamental moral problems with their way of life. Their retreat from social interaction may have reflected an inability to maintain normal relationships while carrying the guilt of their treatment of Samuel. The final lesson of their story extends beyond the personal tragedy of their destroyed friendship to encompass the broader human cost of slavery itself. The sharing arrangement that had seemed so practical and beneficial had revealed the impossible contradictions inherent in treating people as property while maintaining genuine human relationships with them. Their conflict had demonstrated that slavery corrupted not only the lives of the enslaved, but also the emotional and spiritual lives of those who participated in it as owners. The silence that eventually surrounded their story in Richmond society reflects the community's recognition that their conflict had exposed truths that were too uncomfortable to discuss openly. The incident had revealed the instability and moral contradictions of a social system that was already under increasing pressure from external criticism and internal doubt. Years later, when Richmond society had been transformed by war and emancipation, Elderly residents who remembered Catherine and Lydia would sometimes speak of their story as a cautionary tale about the costs of pride and possessiveness. Their friendship had been destroyed by forces that extended far beyond personal character flaws to encompass the fundamental contradictions of a society built on human bondage. The documents and letters that preserve their story serve as testimony to the human capacity for both great affection and terrible destruction. The sharing arrangement that began as an expression of trust and generosity had ended with the death of one woman and the complete social withdrawal of another, while the man whose presence had catalyzed their conflict disappeared into the anonymous suffering that characterized the experience of most enslaved people. Their story remains relevant not only as historical documentation, but as an exploration of the ways in which systems of oppression corrupt all human relationships within their sphere of influence. The friendship between Catherine Rowland and Lydia Pearce had been destroyed not by personal failing, but by the impossible contradictions of trying to maintain genuine human connection within a context that reduced people to property. The final silence that surrounded both women in their later years reflects the broader silence that enveloped much of the moral reality of slavery in antebellum Virginia. Their story had revealed truths that were too painful for their society to acknowledge, truths that would ultimately contribute to the transformation of their world through civil war and emancipation. The price of that silence was paid not only by the enslaved, but by those who, like Catherine and Lydia, found their own humanity corrupted by participation in a system that made genuine human relationship impossible while demanding its constant simulation. Until today, some residents of Church Hill claim they can still hear the echo of footsteps in the late evening hours, walking between the locations where the Rowland and Pearce mansions once stood. Whether these sounds represent the restless spirits of friendship destroyed, or simply the settling of old foundations beneath Richmond's modern streets, remains a matter of individual belief. What cannot be disputed is that the story of Catherine Rowland and Lydia Pearce serves as a permanent reminder of the human cost of reducing people to property and the impossible moral contradictions that such reduction creates for everyone involved. The archives of the Virginia Historical Society contain one final document that brings closure to this tale of friendship destroyed by the moral contradictions of slavery. In 1863, during the chaos of Civil War Richmond, a package arrived at the Society's offices containing the personal papers of both Catherine Rowland and Lydia Pearce, along with a brief letter from an attorney settling the last details of their intertwined estates. Among these papers was a single document that had remained sealed since Catherine's death, a letter she had written to Lydia but never sent, dated just 3 days before her friend's suicide in 1849. The letter, written in Catherine's familiar, precise script, but showing signs of the trembling that had marked her final years, contained a complete confession of the guilt that had consumed her life. In this final communication, Catherine acknowledged that her decision to end the sharing arrangement had been motivated not by practical concerns, but by emotions she had been unable to understand or control. She confessed to feelings of possessiveness and jealousy that had made Samuel's divided loyalties unbearable, even as she recognized the fundamental injustice of treating a human being as property to be owned and controlled. The letter revealed that Catherine had spent the years following their conflict in an agony of regret, understanding too late that her pride had destroyed not only her most precious friendship, but had also contributed to the ultimate tragedy of Lydia's death. She had written repeatedly to the Norfolk plantation where Samuel had been sold, offering to purchase his freedom, but had learned that he had died during a cholera outbreak in 1847, just 2 years after leaving Richmond. This final revelation provided the missing piece of the tragedy that had consumed all 3 lives touched by their arrangement. Samuel's death, occurring while both women still lived with the consequences of their conflict, had made any possibility of redemption or reconciliation impossible. Catherine's letter expressed her belief that knowledge of his fate would have driven Lydia to even deeper despair, and her decision to keep this information secret may have contributed to her friend's final decision to end her own suffering. The civil war that was raging as these documents came to light had already begun the process of dismantling the social system that had created such impossible moral contradictions. The great houses of Churchill would soon empty as Richmond's tobacco aristocracy fled or fell, their wealth scattered and their social order permanently destroyed. The sharing arrangements and property relationships that had seemed so natural and permanent proved as fragile as the friendship they had destroyed. In the decades that followed, as Richmond rebuilt itself on different foundations, the story of Catherine Rowland and Lydia Pierce became a whispered reminder of the human cost of slavery for all who participated in it. Their tale joined the countless other stories of lives destroyed by a system that reduced human beings to property, while demanding that owners maintain the facade of Christian charity and social refinement. The final irony of their story lies in the fact that both women, in their own ways, had recognized the moral impossibility of their situation, but had lacked the courage or understanding to act upon that recognition before it was too late. Their friendship had been sacrificed to a system that corrupted every relationship it touched, making genuine human connection impossible while creating the emotional dependencies that led to their mutual destruction. Today, the sites where their mansions once stood have been absorbed into Richmond's urban landscape, marked only by historical plaques that make no mention of the personal tragedy that unfolded within their walls. But their story endures as testimony to the fact that slavery's greatest victims included not only those who suffered in bondage, but also those whose humanity was corrupted by the act of owning other human beings. The sharing arrangement that had begun as a gesture of friendship between two young women had revealed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their society. The impossibility of maintaining genuine human relationships within a system built upon the denial of human dignity. Their tragic end serves as a permanent reminder that some moral compromises exact a price that extends far beyond their immediate consequences, destroying not only the lives of the oppressed, but also the souls of the oppressors. And perhaps, in the quiet moments when Richmond's evening mist rises from the James River, the echoes of their story still whisper a warning about the human cost of treating people as property and the price that all of society pays when moral contradictions are allowed to fester in silence until they explode in tragedy.